Singularity.
My name is Nicola, and you're watching Singularity FM, the place where we interview the future. If you guys enjoy this podcast, you can help me make it better in a couple of ways. Number one is you can write a brief review on iTunes, or number two, you can go to interviewthefuture.com and you can become a patron. My guest today is Faith Popcorn. Faith founded her Futurist marketing consultancy in 1974, and the New York Times has called her the Trend Oracle. But according to Fortune magazine, she is the Nostradamus of Marketing. Faith is a trusted advisor to the CEOs of the Fortune 200 companies and has predicted a variety of trends, such as Cocooning, and its impact on the COVID culture, social media, and the metaverse. She has been invited to speak all over the world and is the best-selling author of 4 books. Finally, to use Faith's own words, she is a Jew who grew up at a Christian school, a Caucasian who grew up among Asians, a 6th-generation New Yorker, and the adopted mother of 2 girls from China. So, welcome to Singularity FM, Faith.
Thank you so much.
I'm so happy to have you here. So after this kind of longer introduction, I usually like to ask my guests to introduce themselves in their own words, but in a sentence or less. So how would you do that? If we were to meet at a conference, at an event, or anywhere else, let's say we sit next to each other in an airplane, and I ask, who is Faith Popcorn?
I would say the Cassandra of this era. And if you remember Cassandra...
Oh, I remember Cassandra. She insulted Apollo, and he cursed her that she would be blessed with foresight, but she would be cursed that no one would ever believe her.
And that is...
So she foretold the fall of Troy, but nobody believed her.
That is me. I foretold the fall of, meat, and I foretold the fall, so many things, that people would be staying home more, that people would be in revolt and angry, that women would rise.
Film would be replaced by digital.
I believe that people will be replaced by digital eventually. I mean,
okay, we'll get there.
Okay.
I was just trying to point out that I think I watched an interview with you where you were hired by Kodak supposedly in the 80s, and you told them that film would be replaced by digital.
Yes, I was hired by Kodak to do we're always hired. It always starts at the future of pharma. This one was future of film, Coca-Cola, where it's going. So, yeah, future of film. We came back and we said, after many interviews and an endless methodology, the future of film is digital. And they fired us because they were angry. They were furious that we didn't come back with the future of film, which is what they wanted to support a fast-fading company in Rochester, New York. It wasn't the answer they wanted, and they were very, very upset. And of course, history, proves the future of film was digital, and they had a digital department. They used it for medical.
Yeah, of course. And of course, Kodak invented digital photography in the 1970s and sat on it for a long time. By the way, my wife's family on her mother's side is all from Rochester, New York.
Oh, it's cold.
So we've seen the impact of that kind of decision to ignore the future all over that community. And unfortunately, in many ways, Rochester reminds me today of Detroit. Just like, the car industry has the auto industry in Detroit has gone way past its peak now. Mm-hmm. The same or maybe even worse applies to Rochester after Kodak went
It's
bankrupt.
sad. A ghost town, really, right? I mean, yeah, there's a great penalty to not listening to the correct, let's say, prediction of the future. However, in the business model, the person that didn't listen is often retired by then. So there's no penalty to the actual people or teams that go, no, that's not going to happen. So I have little examples like, like oat milk, the replacement of protein, by plants. Those didn't kill people. They hurt sales. But the big ones, like we came to Coca-Cola with a vision that bottled water was coming, and I got it environmentally because the water was starting to get bad. We always laughed in Europe that people drank bottled water, but here, we didn't. And we saw water was not as pure as it should be, and we said to Coca-Cola, you have the most beautiful purification systems for Coke. There's water in Coke. And they came back to us. This is a chairman at that time says, well, if we put, and I hear a lot of that kind of logic, if we bottle water, people will understand that there's water in Coca-Cola. You laugh now. I had to be polite and go, because one of the things, beside not believing Cassandra, chairmen are very good at not believing consumers, or not trusting them, or not thinking they're smart, even a little bit smart. And also, chairmen are very often surrounded, like Mr. Putin, with people that reinforce their lack of vision a lot of times. Because chairmen are really good sometimes at running companies and numbers and balance sheets and, where the ingredients are all this stuff, right? But they don't get out much. They kind of don't get out much. And so they're not listening, to the culture, and they think everything is silly and ridiculous, like the coming of psychedelics, the coming of nutraceuticals. These are simple things. Nicola, I'm sure you saw these things too. But heads of companies or even middle people, they're more rewarded. We're like animals. We do like little, dogs, woof, woof. We do what we're rewarded for. So if we get treats, bonuses for not, taking leaps, and we get yelled at for taking leaps because they could be wrong, and sometimes they're wrong, we just go along and are extremely conservative about what we want to go out on a limb about. So that's the explanation for those who do not listen.
So what's the impact of making predictions that people don't believe, that come true eventually?
True depression.
Because that example with Coca-Cola you're giving, I think, was from the 1980s, I believe, late 80s maybe. So how does that make you feel, and what's the impact on your behavior or your strategy or your futurism or even your psychology?
I call it marketing masochism. I'm sure I'm a masochist because for 4 decades I just keep doing this. They say if you do something with the same response, you're an idiot. And I keep doing it with the same response. I come from a very kind of rough background, the East Village. I'm 6th generation New Yorker. I, was brought up in Shanghai because my father was head of the CID in Shanghai, which is like the CIA. My father he was a criminal lawyer and a detective, a really good detective, which I think I got those genes. But I come from what was a kind of a slum, East Village then, Alphabet City. I'm extremely oppositional in nature because to survive in my family, you had to be oppositional. My mother, too, was a lawyer. She was a negligence lawyer. my grandmother was like running like, some tenements downtown, and everybody in my family was tough, especially the women. So every year I get up and I think, this will be different. I'll say this, and I can build an incredible case. Fabulous. We call it in law, circumstantial evidence. So I can build you a case for my view of the future that's bulletproof. Yet I cannot prove the future. So, and we'll talk about the way I discovered the future maybe later. And every single time they say, like, yeah, that could be, probably not. I mean, most recently we repositioned a large communications company, or a pipe that put internet into people's homes, let's say, and we said
internet service provider.
Yeah, we said, hey, people are going to be staying home more, and that pipe, and stop calling yourself a dumb pipe. They call themselves a dumb pipe, right? Because they just put stuff through there, nothing important except connection. And I said, people are going to get their education through that pipe. They're going to get medical. They're going to get protection. They're going to be able to eventually change their rooms, color, scent, everything. And because what's coming is a rougher and rougher environment where people will be staying home more and more. And Cocooning, I named and framed in 1982. But I meant it to be very cozy. People stay home and they'll have little gardens. The Martha Stewart version, she gives us a lot of credit for, naming her whole frame. Yeah. But Cocooning started to become like defensive. We want to keep stuff out. We want to filter air, filter information, filter everything, keep our kids at home. So the chairwoman at that time said, this is very apocalyptic, which in marketing means I don't like it. It's too hard to sell internally. And then they say to me, not the first time, I feel like a washerwoman. Can you scrub this deck up so it looks a little bit more positive? So, I grab my detergent and I go back and I scrub it up, make it look a little nicer, not so scary. And COVID hit 3 months later. And then she called me and she said, over compliment, how did you know? I said, my view of the future did not change because COVID intensified, the timeline. You couldn't go out, so you had to move this a little quicker. It made it move faster. But it was the same vision. And we brought back the deck and they repositioned actually the company based on that. And that was that story, but it was accidental success. No, it wasn't like they believed it. So I have many stories. I'll tell you the Campbell Soup story, my favorite guy, when you want me to.
Okay, we'll come back to that, but before we jump into futurism, and I'll kind of put you on the spot and ask you to walk us through a couple of civilizational scenarios. But before that, people would be dying to find out, where does Faith Popcorn come from? Is it your real name? And if not, how did you get it?
Oh, of course.
That's kind of, I'm sure everyone would have this at the back of their mind. So why don't you walk us through that story and tell us?
So when I first started my company in 1974, I think I was the first futurist, really, in marketing anyway. And I was a futurist because I don't like being yelled at. As a matter of fact, I have tremendous aversion to being yelled at, having come from a yelling, screaming family. So I thought, if I predict the future, nobody can yell at me. Boy, was I wrong about that. But anyway, a couple of years after I opened, Fortune magazine called me, and they said, we want to come visit you and talk to you about what you're doing. And I thought, wow, well, I have no clients, so I better make up stuff. And I made up what I thought was going to happen about this and what was going to happen about that, and eventually that became a New York Times column, but not for years later. And these guys came up, and two guys, and they had pencils, honestly, and they were writing notes, and they said, well, we're here because we're fascinated with your name. I said, you came up here to find out how I got my name? You know, not what I'm thinking. So this is what I told them. I said, when my great-grandfather came here, he was an immigrant from Italy, near Lee Iacocca's grandfather. His name was Cornet, and when he came across on immigration, they used to call him Papa in the old country, came across, on Statue of Liberty, they said, what is your name, sir? And he said, my name is Papa Cornet. I said, and I shortened it to popcorn, and that's it. They write everything down, and they printed it. Maybe that's why they never came back to interview me. But the true story is, I was a young copywriter working for an Italian art director, which was the model in those days. The art director didn't speak. He mainly grunted, and the copywriter wrote, and it was my first job. And my name was Faith Plotkin. And he thought that was terrible. And he goes, Plotkin, how can I say this? This is awful. And he started to introduce me as Popcorn. This is Faith Popcorn. So I just changed it. I thought, that's better. Okay. And I went to AKA, you can do, also known as, which is a legal way to change your name without going to court. And if you're known by this name for longer than your actual birth name, it becomes your legal identity. So I'm Faith Popcorn, and it's on my passport, and the IRS knows me by this name. And that's the story of my name.
Wow. Do you not have some kind of a feeling, though, that that's some women today would say that's kind of a very misogynistic type of a story? A boss, a male boss who couldn't pronounce the female employee's last name and
changed it.
Instead of like doing his best to improve himself, decided to, instead of changing himself, he changed her name, basically.
You know what?
And also maybe somewhat derogatory, is it not? Or
okay,
just to give you an example, my blogging name is Socrates. Now, that's not a name I picked either. That name was given to me when I was in the army. And in the army, being a Socrates is not a wise strategy to survival. Neither is it complimentary. It is pretty derogatory because you're not supposed to ask questions. You're supposed to follow orders. Asking too many questions gets you killed. So when I was called Socrates then, it was not a compliment. It was a derogatory alias. But, I thought, well, it may be true. I probably ask way too many questions. So instead of fighting it, and I'm happy to pay the price for it, obviously, after spending so many times in the regimental arrest and all that. So in solitary, usually. So I might as well embrace the name rather than fight it. So I wonder if you don't feel like there may be some kind of an element like that.
I love that you're asking me this, Nikolai. Do you know nobody has ever asked me that? Which is fascinating. Well, I thought that he saw the true me with popcorn.
Popcorn?
Yeah. I came up with stuff. I was always saying like poppy things. Like one time a client took me to a factory when I worked in the advertising business. I was a, copywriter, right? And he took me to this pot and pan factory, Farberware. And I saw this redundant, thing that they made pots by forming the metal over a model, right? The thing.
It's a press.
Right, a press.
Yeah.
And I said, isn't this dangerous? Because don't people get kind of hypnotized and have accidents in factories? I was known for these pop questions. And also was known for clients going, don't bring her back. Do not bring her back. So I felt that it was much more of an expression that he saw the true me. But of course, I was also in love with him. So maybe that's even more is that anti-feminist or is that natural? He was my first boss. He was 22 years older than me. His name was Gino Constantino Garlanda. He had a beautiful name. And
Typical Italian
I
Gino.
was crazy about him. So, yeah, that's the rest of the story. So, no, I've never, I have not been, what do you call it, formed by men or women. You know, maybe my mother, but that's about it. So I didn't feel that way.
Well, good. And I can see how, even when something is derogatory, it could still be true at the same time.
I don't think it was derogatory.
It was true.
If somebody sees your true soul, and here's another story about Plotkin. I was a young woman. I was raised in the East Village. I went to jazz clubs. I didn't like that name. I thought it was heavy, Plotkin, right? So I had cards made up, and they said Faith on them. And my phone number at the time, at home, I lived at home, right, was AL4 Algonquin 46222. Which is a beautiful phone number, by the way. And it said Faith. And I would hand out these cards. Well, I was thrown out of clubs because they thought I was a hooker. So I've had worse stories about my name. So I don't know. And then my mother told me she was going to name me either Fanny or Faith. And I thought that was, okay, good. I lucked out with the Faith.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's move on. I was just trying to see if there's sort of not a feminist angle on that or something, out of curiosity, because one thing that we are going to discuss, and why don't we bring it up now, even you're probably one of the earliest women in the field of futurism. And even today, what is it? You started in 1974. We're 2022. So let's say 48 years later, there's very few women futurists. And, a proper criticism of my podcast, a fair criticism of my podcast has been that out of, let's say, 300 interviews that I've done so far, probably, I don't know, 10 to 15% of them have been women only. And therefore it's, highly inequitable in that sense. Gender equity is lacking, clearly. Now, my excuse traditionally has been that that's kind of a reflection of the representation of people within the industry, the futurist industry and the general tech industry and AI and so on. But my wife is not willing to give me any breaks on that, not even a little bit. And, I've put some substantial effort over the years to kind of improve that. And I used to have much worse ratio, like a 6% ratio. So I've improved it by a factor of 3, but it's still grossly inequitable. So how do you feel like a woman in a heavily dominated male field? And what is it that you think, and does that even have anything to do with the fact that you're a Cassandra, that your clients don't believe you? Would you think that if you were a man, your clients would be more believing of your forecasts? Where is the gender is what I'm trying to ask here in a different way in futurism, and how have you dealt with it, and how do we deal with it generally as professionals in the field, but also as a society?
Women are natural futurists. Maybe that's because they don't have titles futurists, because they're natural futurists. Because, and I'm not saying, well, we could talk about how I figure out the future, but they're natural futurists because they're, and I can go back to cave days too, but they're so intuitive. Let's talk about what intuitive means. It means that your senses are more developed. So when a woman, and you know this, I know you're a brilliant man, you've studied a lot, in the cave days when the men went out and hunted using one side of their brain. Men usually use right at one time, and then left if they can another time. women go left, right, left, right. That's how their brains fire. And the reason for that is they were holding the baby, they were making the, let's say, the food, but their peripheral vision actually is better than men's because they had to look for the lions and the tigers in back of them. So when your mother said, I have eyes in back of my head, I can see everything you're doing, there's truth to that. Women can look around and incorporate a much more, a more of a 360 view. So I don't think women think of themselves as futurists. Maybe they don't have title of futurists. The ones that are buried in companies, Fortune 200s, and this is my least favorite thing, so, are insights. That's what they do. Head of insights. What is an insight more than a vision of the future? But it's buried in this extremely boring title about research. Futurism is supported by research, perhaps, which we could talk about later, but it's not created from research. So really they're saying that people get these insights, which are visions, which are like visions. You get, oh, that's going to happen or this is going to happen. So I think there are futurists that are female, but I don't think that they call themselves futurists. I think they're hidden in companies. I think that they're not wanting to come out and say anything dangerous. I've never had a woman in a company disagree with me, ever, in this roles, but I've had many of them say, my management's never going to buy this. Many. So that's my answer to why you can't find them.
So what can we do to get more women in futurism, for example? And should we be even trying to do that? I mean, in professional capacity, you said that they're intuitively and naturally more inclined to be futurists, but how do we get them to make the step from, being naturally and intuitively inclined to do that to being professional, to being in the industry, in the field? Because honestly, how many other women do you know being futurists other than you?
I know.
There's a few, but very few compared to the industry
I know
overall.
a few. There's a woman named Sarah Davanzo. I don't know if you've ever had her on. She was head of research at L'Oreal, and she's just left and gotten, in a way, a more adventurous job. So she's one. A woman named Kathy Hackle, I think, calls herself a futurist. I think she probably is. No, there are not a lot because you don't want to... Look, it's hard enough to fight the fight in business, in Fortune 200, being a female, being organ rejected as a female, for the most of up till now. Then you call yourself a futurist also? I mean, no. So I think that's why.
Okay, let us touch a bit on the Faith Popcorn Brain Preserve. What is it? What do you guys do there, and what's its mission?
So Brain Reserve, when I started the company, I couldn't afford to hire anybody, of course, right? So it's called Brain Reserve, and the reserve was I had a group of 14 people I really respected, and we brainstormed together, and we couldn't get brain trust because at that time, maybe still true, a bank was the only one, and how wrong that was, the only one that could use the word trust. You couldn't call yourself a trust, only banks, which is so untrustworthy. But anyway, so I called it Brain Reserve, and that's how my talent bank started. I started to collect people that were actually making the future. So people that were doing skin grafts to create an embryo, really interesting, maybe science people and life people and food people and all kinds of people. So that's where Brain Reserve comes from, that word.
And what's your mission?
My mission is to continually, no matter what, rain, sleet, snow, and derision, bring a vision of what's coming, period. I don't only bring it to business, I bring a vision of what's coming. And hopefully I'm a warning system, a warning system in a body to say, this is coming, this is going to sink you, here's the hole. Maybe it's like, I don't know, being so worried all the time. It's a Jewish thing, By the way, my Italian story, I'm 100% Jewish. They did not do their research either at Fortune magazine when I said Papa Corny. But yeah, so, we Jews worry a lot about, everything. And so that's my mission, to say what I believe is coming.
Okay, let's grab that mission and see how far we can run with it then. So let's say that usually you work, you say, with Fortune 200 companies, but let's say today the client is humanity, the human civilization. And we come to Faith Popcorn and we ask, Faith, what are the major issues or trends that we should be looking at?
Oh, that's not as hard as I thought you were going to ask me to tell humanity what's coming. Ugh. The trends that we should be looking at. Well, it depends why you want to look at something. Do you want to make money? Are you just curious? Do you want, the number one question I ask when I speak, do a lot of speaking, people raise their hand, what should my children study? What should they, that's people very interested in that. Well, the trends,
you tell us, what do you think is the highest priority trend that we should be keeping an eye on, or trends, several, let's say the top three, if it's more than one, that we should be aware of and keep an eye on and maybe even do something about? So we give you a total blank slate.
I'll give you an easy one, which people are still rejecting, but it's alternative reality. So as the planet gets tougher and tougher to live on, then we could go back to what trends could save it, but I don't honestly have a lot of hope for that. But anyway, alternative reality is right now expressed in the metaverse, where people find it more and more difficult to live in IRL, in real life, physical life. So they look to live in almost like a parallel life that's happier or more pleasant or easier to navigate. But right now it's not, people aren't sure about it because it's not that easy to navigate. I'll tell you what's going to make it easy, because you still sometimes have to put on this Oculus and like look through and learn. Like the kids have an easier time with it because very similar to gaming. As a matter of fact, its popularity grew out of gaming. Gaming is an alternative reality, and kids are living in it more and more. Soon we're going to have education in the metaverse, where your kid can jump into learn the Civil War by taking part in a civil war, and they can figure out what sides and what really happened, and actually they say gamify, but I'll say make it much more, history becomes more real. So I think we'll be doing that. We'll be treated in the metaverse. We'll be like, you'll see your doctor there. You'll go to concerts there. You'll meet significant others there. You'll be able to take on different, skins they call it, but like avatars, or who are you really? Like Popcorn was just the beginning. I could have many, many different personalities and expressions. So I think that I don't want to call it just the metaverse because it's too small. I think alternative reality living is definitely coming, and then after that we could talk about that, uploaded consciousness, and that's another thing, that's end to death and things like that. But
So do you think those are the most important trends that we should pay attention to?
Two, another one is going to be, because identity is wrapped up in that, a lot of things, But another one is if you were interested in trying to save this planet. And it's so funny, we say save the planet, we don't even hear those words. When you're saving something, it means it's on its way to the end. Otherwise, it wouldn't need saving. So I would say that goodness, which is what I tried to bring to Campbell's Soup once, because they were the good company, and I thought that was an enormous vision, like one of my best.
So why don't you tell us that story here then?
My favorite chairman of all time, he's retired now. He was like, like, I took a picture of him once. He was reading The Road Less Taken. It was like a spontaneous photo. Nothing on his desk. That explained him. He was like out there, but seemingly conservative, wore a suit and very nice. And, he was like, very handsome guy and but he was out there. And he hired me to say, what's the future of Campbell's Soup? I said, the good. You've had good for 100 years. The kids that go, Campbell's Soup is good. I said, goodness is the thing that's coming. People want companies that are good. This is before all this stuff about, we invest in, we give to charity and we're a good company and we don't use bad ingredients and all that goodness stuff, which, by the way, most of it not true. But so I said, you really have the opportunity. And you can, we could have like soup vans go across the country and feed people. We could show that tomatoes are, anti-cancer. They have beautiful ingredients in them. We could take it out of the can, and my presentation was a bunch of soup cans with tomato plants growing out like vines. And I got Martha Stewart, before she went to jail, to say that she would work with him and help him and everything. And, and then his people were not so much in the boat. And they go, but Doug, suppose somebody in the company does something not good. And then what are we going to say? But he stuck with it. But then he got in a terrible automobile accident. I'm telling you, the powers are against futurism, because he couldn't execute this, of course, and they killed it as soon as he was out of commission. But he says now he thinks the greatest miss, in his career, not his fault. And I think it was one of the greatest visions in my career, that people would want goodness. And the reason, the reason I felt confident about this with him is he was good. This man, I can say that about very few people, was a good human. So I'd say that's another trend I think would save the planet, if we could find the goodness in us and become not a little less selfish, a lot less selfish and more good.
So what year was that?
That has to be 15 years ago, 18 years ago. Yeah,
so early
that
2000s?
Was before, these various companies. Well, Ben and Jerry's, two guys I know, they were good. They were very early to do 1% for peace, donate. They were very good. And even when they were acquired, which I was very worried about, they were acquired by Unilever. And I go like, oh my God, the end of Ben & Jerry's. But they managed to keep their identity. And Unilever, I guess, understood that their identity was so pure and excellent, and kind of left them alone after a while and let them do their thing. So, but this goodness vision was early on.
It reminds me a lot to Patagonia, which is my favorite company, with a kind of a very similar vision, I think, about goodness, and in practical terms, what it means and how they can do or play their part to make it happen. But let's grab the other idea here about saving the planet. So if we are to shift attention on what are the things that could require us to save the planet from, Or what are, in other words, the major threats or existential challenges to our civilization in general, or our planet, however you want to call it? What are the things we should look out there and, watch for?
You see, I can't prove this, and I know you're a different kind of man, I can see that, and you're a gentleman, but when men run the planet, which they do, men like to fight. They get a kick out of it. They, as boys, they hit each other over the head. It's proven that men like this. And when you have men in charge of, winning everything, winning things they don't even want, just winning and winning, it's very hard to save the planet. Women, the birth mothers, Mother Nature and the birth mothers, I think would be more successful if they were in charge, because I don't think that they would want to send their kids into war. I think they have natural maternal instincts, many of them, not all of them, toward children. They couldn't bear, I don't think they would be bombing schools with children in the basement. They couldn't. It goes against their psychology and their actual DNA. So I think that would be a start to get more women, running things. That's where I would start.
Well, so you're making the argument that some people have made recently that, for example, countries that have been run by women, like whether it's New Zealand, whether it's Taiwan, etc., had a much better outcome, whether with lower mortality rates, whether with lower infection rates, whether with lower economic costs during the pandemic. For example, countries that were run by women fared much better off. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. I totally accept that, especially for some of those cases. Now, Scandinavia, maybe also a few other good options, like whether it's, I think, Finland, whether it's a few other countries there. But maybe Iceland was another one of the examples. I forget if they're run by a woman right now or not. But then we also have the opposite examples. We have Margaret Thatcher, who started the Falklands War. We have Madeleine Albright, who said that the embargo against Iraq, which resulted to something like, I forget, 250,000 deaths in children for the duration of the embargo due to the lack of medical supplies and stuff, was a cost worth paying in her mind.
What about Golda Meir? Also pretty tough girl. What about Queen Elizabeth?
Yeah, she was in a... I'm willing to give her a much bigger break.
What about Queen Elizabeth?
Speaking. Yeah, because she was in a tougher spot, and you can make a much more bigger argument that it's a fight for existential survival, right? Whether Margaret Thatcher was fighting for her political survival. And, before the Falklands War, her popularity has tanked, and the polls were showing she's not going to survive, politically speaking. She started the Falklands War, and boom, her popularity
because
exploded.
Men were voting for her.
Which is why,
Men were voting for her. Yeah,
Pardon?
Killing people.
Yes, and they loved her nickname, which was the Iron Lady, right? So she was famous for being tougher than the guys in the room.
But look at Queen Elizabeth, the colonizer, the perpetuator of slavery. I'm fighting on your side, but I'm saying in general, because are these really women? Are these really women? Or are they infused with testosterone and ideas? Because according to Freud, which I'm not. I think like there's a lot to be said against it at this point. But this idea of penis envy, that women really want to be men, they want to have penises. That's their, that's the, what do you call it? The idea of power, testosterone, penises. That many of these women leaders maybe are infused with that, and here's their opportunity to act like men. That's how I would explain it. So, yeah.
So we do have exceptions. Anyway, let's go back to the trends and to futurism. So what is futurism in general, and what is what you refer to as applied futurism?
So futurism in general, like we have 17, we call them trends. I would call them truths in this bank, let's say. And each one explains a different part of what's going to happen. So there's vigilante consumer, people getting angry, going on strike. You see unionization at Starbucks and others. You're going to see a lot of this. That's one. Cocooning, I explained, people, going inward, staying home. Anchoring, which is spirituality. You can see 17 visions. If you put it on your face in an oculus, these 17 holes, you would see, and I broke them out like that so people could understand them better, because if you give somebody a whole picture at once, it's very difficult to absorb. So I broke them into pieces, put on an oculus, you see the future. That's what my vision of the future, is.
So you have what we may call 17 types of lenses through which you're looking at the future. But what is futurism in general, and what is applied futurism? What's the distinction there between the two methodological approaches?
So futurism is a general view of the future, broken into 17 pieces in our lexicon. Applied futurism, so we come with this. When we come to a client, I think we have a very good idea of what's going to happen, to whom and where and how and all of it. But when we come to a client, they want to know, what does it mean to them? It took me quite a few years to figure out why I wasn't getting business, because they didn't want to know what was going to happen. They went, what does it mean to me? Hey, that's applied futurism. So we'll say, if you're a food company, what does it mean to you? I remember we worked with Tyson Foods, which Tyson's the largest protein producer in the world still. And I remember early on, we said to John Tyson, vegetarianism is coming. And it has to be...
What year was that?
20 years? 18 years? 20? More? Ago.
So 2000.
I think it was in the Popcorn
2000s.
Report. That was 1992. Popcorn Report, which I didn't want to write, and I just hate this idea of packaging things, so it's packaging what I do. Popcorn, because it makes it so unfluid. As soon as you write it down, you can't dream on. So vegetarianism is in the Popcorn Report, 1992. So that's why I wrote those books. Yeah, it benchmarked what I was
30
saying,
years ago.
right? So John Tyson, bless his heart, he goes if you're going to talk that way, Miss Popcorn, maybe we shouldn't be working together. That was a curse word to him. But gradually, as he, I think, got more trust and we got closer and friendlier, and I think he began to see that it was a bit away, so he didn't have to worry about it that much. But I think he began to see, and they started to acquire companies that would fill that hole. That's the best I can expect, really. When we say we worked deeply, with an Indra Nooyi, let's say at Pepsi, and go sugar is, you're on tobacco road with sugar. Tobacco road, finally, we say cigarettes give you cancer, kill you, sugar, fats, sugar, same. So if you're, I think that it, we helped her write, her Bible of, her whole thing about, doing good and, originally when she came on from CFO to CEO, her whole thing. But I think she began to see that, and she started to get into good for you, and she went deeper in there. So that's applied futurism, what it means to a particular company. What does it mean to communication companies? What does it mean to pharma companies? That has been a little bit tough because pharma companies, I think, now even exceed banks in being hated and government. People don't trust them, right? But I think what COVID happened, they saw that science really could save people. And I think that there's we call it pharma karma, a great opportunity to come back and do good. But anyway, that's applied futurism, what it means to a company, an industry, a person.
Yeah, it's impressive to me if you kind of isolated the trend towards veganism in the early 90s. That's pretty impressive. And I can see how a lot of people would be pushing back. I'm a keynote speaker. That's how I actually make a living. The podcast and everything I do online is kind of free. And then I charge for my keynotes. And I've been vegan now for 6 years. Probably one of the best decisions I've ever done in my life. And so I was pitching, or my agent was pitching me for a industry poultry producing conference in South America. And that was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where the poultry producers of South America were gathering, and they were asking to look into the future. And I told them basically my pitch is the world that will change, and the future is vegan, and I'm here to tell you how and why. And if you're open to hear that message, maybe help you find out the way as per what you can do about it to ride the trend or ride that wave of change rather than get drowned and destroyed by it. But my pitch was unsuccessful. They decided that I'm too much outside of their zone of sort of comfort, and that message was like not necessarily the message they wanted to have at the conference, because I was going to be the opening keynote speaker. And so they were afraid that the kind of tone I'm going to set for them would be kind of doom and gloom, the end of the world is coming. Because my title was The Future is Vegan. So imagine how that goes.
Maybe you should not have told them what you're going to speak about.
No, I wanted to be 100%, and I'm always very open with my clients or potential clients, so that they have the full capacity to decide if my message is for them or not. Because again, my name is Socrates, and a lot of people don't appreciate what I have to say, and that's okay by me. So if that's not the message they want to hear, that's okay, but there's a cost that they would pay for refusing to listen to something that may be actually beneficial to them, because you can ignore reality for only so long, and then it smacks you over the head.
Lab-grown meat is going to be the future. I mean, people don't have to give it up. I mean, those poultry people really should be investing in lab-grown. In Singapore, there's some beautiful stuff being made. I mean, Beyond Burger and all those is not as good, really, for you. A lot of but at least it's not meat. And if you've ever seen a cow go up that ramp to slaughter, or you've walked into what do you call it, like a chicken coop, industrial. I became this way because in France, I was like in south of France, right? And there was these mimists, people that act out things. They were holding screens, 4 of them. One showed a cow going to slaughter, one showed a chicken being slaughtered, one showed a pig. Pigs smarter than dogs, right? Pigs are fantastic.
Yeah. They have the intelligence of a toddler, by the way.
But my kids also had stopped eating meat before me, But it is absolutely bad for the planet, bad for humanity, bad for your heart. bad example. It's murderous, it's cruel. And you can't think it tastes that good once you realize that.
And yet a lot of people would argue that the future is sort of paleo, low carbs, high fat and high protein, free range.
Yeah, if it's lab grown,
kind of
fine.
Go hunt your own food.
But not things that walk around with legs and make animal noises that you can hear on TikTok. No. So they're wrong, Nicola, Socrates. They're wrong.
Let's talk a little bit here about technology and in general and AI in particular. So, I mean, my podcast name is Singularity FM. Used to be called Singularity One-on-One. So we have to talk about AI. We have to talk about the singularity. We have to talk about transhumanism. So what's your take on artificial intelligence in particular and the technological singularity in general?
First of all, I say to people when they say artificial intelligence, I go, drop the artificial. It's going to be real intelligence, I believe, that can learn from each other. Like we learn from each other, they will be learning from each other and getting smarter and smarter. Elon Musk says it's the greatest threat to society. I mean, but that's what's, I think, going to happen. And, I believe that we will become more melded. Already it's happening with machine, that will, as soon as you have a fake knee, you now have a machine in you, or like a pacemaker or a artificial anything, diabetes release system in your body. You think it's going to be.
I'm severely short-sighted, so I can't literally see without my contact lenses.
But soon your contact lenses won't have to be a lens. That's going to be over in about 5 minutes. And, now you can have your eyes fixed to some degree, but soon you're going to be able to, look into a screen or something and they'll be able to adjust it, or swallow a little bot something and it'll be fixed. Or, your spine, walk in, say, like spine rejuvenation done. All this medicine where there's blood and cutting, I think is going to be soon regarded as, oh my God, remember when we used to cut people open to take out cancer? Like, so primitive. So, I definitely think that that's coming.
So you think that AI is coming, and you think that you said, Elon is right when he says it's the greatest threat to humanity, but yet somehow you're not worried. It doesn't seem you're worried about it.
I make myself sleep better at night because I say, I'm just the messenger. I'm just the messenger. I have to tell myself, I'm not making the future. It doesn't matter what I think. It just matters that my mission is to say, what's coming. It's the greatest threat to humanity as we know it, but humanity is changing. We're evolving. Suppose we thought, like, if dinosaurs evolved, into birds or whatever, or people, or that they shouldn't have. They should have stayed that way. We're in a constant state of evolution. So I think humanity is not going to be 100% human the way we think of it. And I think intelligence will be boosted. And I wrote about this in 1990, brain chips. We worked for a large technological company. It was actually a military company that had things in the air that, could see where to bomb. At that time they were using radar and, and we said to them, you know what? Place a chip in a child's tooth. It's a grandma present. And we did research. A grandma would pay at that time, so 1990, $5,000 in $1990 to buy this chip. Put it in your grandchild's tooth, and those things could locate your kid if he was snatched. And they could do it. And do you know what they said to me? No, we're not going to do that. I go, why? They said, so they didn't argue that people would want it. Their argument was the first kidnapper that comes along and rips somebody's teeth out to find it, unlikely. It would be bad press. So every large company can spin decisions and leading to bad press like nothing. If they paid more attention to making good stuff instead of thinking about what bad press they're going to get if they put in advances, and that thing never happened. They put it in sheep because if sheep wandered, there's a chip in your dog.
I think today pets are
chipped, but not in your kid.
Chipped.
Isn't your kid important?
Yeah.
So they'll put a chip in the backpack. Well, how many kids lose it? Put the first thing a kidnapper does is throw out the phone, throw out the backpack.
Well, what about privacy concerns and stuff like that, and the fact that the, quote, kidnappers could use the same tech to locate the victim rather than to help the police or the parents to find the missing child?
Yeah, then we shouldn't have computers because, of geolocation. I mean, yeah, but it's the job of the people that invent this to try to, to put up the right kind of walls around it.
Yeah, do those walls work, though, historically speaking? It doesn't seem like they have in the past. Those walls seem to be, especially in the United States, where you read hacking every day, whether it's the Chinese or the Russians or just, mercenary hackers who want a ransom for a pipeline or a hospital, you name it. It's like almost a daily occurrence. And there's huge criminal organizations that are literally specializing in that.
So don't work on the walls. Don't protect your children. You're working on the wrong thing. Work on the walls. Not saying that you shouldn't do this. Anyway, think about this 40 years ago. No, So, I don't know.
Sure, yeah. Yeah. So going back to AI, though, what's your timeline? When do you think we should be seeing that kind of an AI that Ray Kurzweil talks about, that Werner Vinge talks about, that many of the futurists talk about, and that, have divided the world? People like Ray Kurzweil being on the very optimistic side, saying that we would become one with the AI. That's kind of the idea of transhumanism, perhaps, the merger between men and machines that you were talking about, that if you have an artificial knee, you're going to be like them, and eventually we're going to have neuroimplants and cognitive enhancement and all of that. But then you have people like Elon Musk, who is paradoxically a big investor in many of those AI companies, but also Bill Gates, Dr. Stephen Hawking. The late Dr. Stephen Hawking made headlines around the world by saying that the birth of AI could be the end of humanity. So,
as we know it.
Well, that's the matter of interpretation, right? So some of those people meant very literally, not as we know it, but very literally the end of humanity. Even Steve Wozniak and Bill Gates have made proclamations to that effect, but especially Elon Musk, right? So literally, he says that AI could be the greatest danger, more than nukes, in his own words, that could literally be our extermination.
Extermination or evolution?
Or I think in a TV interview, he said it was like trying to do in those horror movies where you're trying to kind of revive or recall the evil spirit or something like that, and then everyone gets killed by it in the horror movies, right? So that's what Elon Musk likened AI to. So that's very literally our death in his view, not some kind of a in sense that as we know it. It's very literal.
And your question
death.
is, when is that going to happen, or is it going to happen?
No, my question is, where do you stand on that debate between the optimists like Ray Kurzweil, and the pessimists who say that could be the end of us, and what's the timeline, regardless of what the outcome could be, what's the timeline that we could expect AI to show up in the
Hasn't
picture?
it shown up already?
Well, we have had AI everywhere. The argument that perhaps I would make is that this is what we would call narrow artificial intelligence, which is to say it plays chess, it plays Go, it redirects your cell phone, or it has some very specific narrow application in a specific field or realm, which is not generally applicable outside of that specific realm or field, which it is designed for. Whereas general intelligence would be able to not only play chess, but to drive your car, to drive an airplane, to take care of your grandma, to babysit your kids, to be a companion to you when you're lonely, to be your BFF, to listen to your confessions, and give you life advice, all of this, to replace humans in all of those other functions.
I think that I know you're on the side of it's much later. I think it's sooner. I think it's not incremental. I think there'll be jumps, like everything we think, at this rate it's going to take 60 years, 100 years. Maybe we say that to make ourselves feel better. I think it's going to be faster. I think, like if you read Clara and the Sun, my favorite book, Ishiguro, about a companion to a young girl, I think,
Kazuo Ishiguro, the Nobel laureate in literature.
It's very good to read that book because it makes it much more real. You can see how that could happen, and the companion could feel, learn to actually got better at feeling as it went along. So I think it's going to be sooner. I think it's going to start with those kind of things, like safety. Like, wouldn't it be great if you had a little bot take your kid to school, or be on the bus, or be in its pocket, or or little companions, or for elderly little companions. We're seeing robots in the operating room already. Actually, they're so much more accurate than human doctors. So as soon as it, I think that's how it's the frog in the water. By the way, that's a myth. When a frog gets dropped into hot water, it jumps out. But anyway, it's going to go slowly, and then you're there.
So you're a lot more optimistic on AI or you're kind of largely, it seems to me, alongside Ray Kurzweil's.
You're going to rent brain chips.
Line.
They're going to, you don't have to learn French. You don't have to learn math. Chip you. Maybe you're going to lease them, not buy them. They'll be, maybe expensive in the beginning. As it becomes more convenient, or we can make more money with these chips, or we can get rid of something annoying like the screen, we're going to incorporate them. We're not going to be thinking big, deep, philosophical, brilliant thoughts about, is this bad for humanity? We always do things that make things easier or making more money. That's easier, making more money, healthier.
Okay, so let's go there then. In terms of you mentioned bad for humanity. Let's bring in ethics here and see. So first of all, should we bring ethics in the conversation of futurism at all?
Well, as I said, futurism to me is the reporting of what's coming from my part in it. Tell me something then, Nicola. How much of ethics, and soon you might morph over to religion, even worse, but how much has ethics influenced our decisions?
Well, I would say almost 100%. As Aristotle said, if you want to do ethics, you have to do ethics. If you don't want to do ethics or philosophy, you have to do ethics. So saying that there is no ethics is a kind of an ethics. Saying that there are no rules is a general rule, which is the framework, an ethical framework within which you make your decisions. And saying that there are rules are there for the rules within which you make your own decisions. And then we can go and unwrap what those rules are. But to me, it seems that it's unavoidable at some level or another. So you just said before that it all comes down to money, for example, or one of the two things that you mentioned was it comes down to money. Well, that's a kind of ethics. Money is a value within a system of values. And any system which ranks things in order of value is an ethical system. So you could say, well, that person has no ethics, they just care about money. But that is their ethical system. And the highest value, the most prized item in their ethical system would be money. So, but they still do have an ethical system. And if you say, well, it's spirituality, or if it's their personal fulfillment, or if it's like their children's welfare, or what have you, those are all their own respective ethical systems. And so therefore, to me, it seems that it's impossible to avoid, because every time you have to make a decision, you have to rank and prioritize out of several options. And the moment you do that, you're doing ethics. The only choice you have is it explicit, where you actually properly weigh all the opportunities within a kind of a methodological ethical system, or you do it unconsciously and implicitly without any awareness, and you just proceed. But either way, it's unavoidable, I think. And that actually brings me to a question I have for you, because you said I'm a futurist, so I'm about what's coming. This is where I want to push back a little. Philip K. Dick, I think, said once that if something is inevitable, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't resist it. And another way of putting this is that kind of view of the future. Let's say something is coming, whether it's a technology or a trend or an occurrence, an event and stuff like that. Let's say Cassandra predicted Troy would fall. That's an event. Kind of brings this kind of inevitability and lack of agency. And what I want to push back with as a philosopher is like, well, are we helpless observers, or are we active participants? And my answer to that is, I want to, and that's been kind of at the core of my work for the last 17 years, is I want to inspire people to stop being spectators and to jump on the arena and become participants. And therefore, instead of having a passive spectator role, to embrace and take responsibility for an active one. Instead of letting the future happen to you, trying your best, even if you fail or when you fail, trying your best to proactively create the future. So you tell me where you see futurism in your role within that kind of reasoning, because you see, and that's one of the reasons why I don't like to be called futurist, even though I am being called, and I even call myself occasionally when I have to sell my keynotes. But first and foremost, I'm a philosopher and an ethical philosopher, because to me, that's the starting point. It's not about, is it the future coming? It's about, is it a good future to me personally, or a bad one? Is it some future that we can steer towards a better outcome or a worse outcome? Say, take global warming. We know it's happening. It's a scientific fact. You cannot argue with the science about it. We know the rough timeline. And so the question then is, do we do something about it or we don't? And how much? And what should we do about it? And those are all ethical questions. But the trend may be coming if or what we do about it is how we can sort of position ourselves with respect to the future and eventually, hopefully, steer it, at least, if not shape and create it entirely.
So even though I say, like, I report it, I have tried to change it. I would say I've laid myself down, in companies to say you have to, hire more women, you have to promote them, you have to take your hands off their neck. You have, diversity, I hate that word. Every time they package with a word, you don't feel the hurt anymore. You know what I mean? So, people tell me they can't find any black people to hire. They can't find it. It's just amazing. And I go let's go to Howard University. My partner in the business, Tiana Holt, brilliant, black. I mean, we listen to that together and go we could have this whole company filled with black people in about 10 minutes. Smart black people, brilliant black people, courageous black people, but there's such a resistance. So we're always trying to do that. I was on Pepsi's case for 25 years. You want to keep employees, bring childcare in. And finally, Indra, practically on her last month at the company, put childcare into purchase. So yes, I try to interrupt, if you call it ethical structure. I try to interrupt the future, getting Tyson to make things other than, things that have faces on them, let's say. So I would say, yes, you can try very hard to change outcome or create outcome, but it's slow haul. I mean, it's slow. Yeah, of course, we're influencers. We people come up after and go help me get a job, help me get out of this company. I said, I didn't come here to free the slaves, but I'll try. I'll try to I mean, this whole revolution we're having, I don't know what you think about it, but this reason not to come to work is we let the workers out of jail, and now, because they worked at home and they had a very good time, they worked hard. They work hard. People work hard at their jobs, but they like to be with their kids, and they grew their gardens, and they cooked, and they did all these things. You think you're going to get them back so easily? You are not getting them back. They now, many of them, in our research, would rather leave the company than come back to work. 5 days, never. So we were battling will there be a 4-day work week someday? Now we're saying 3 days, 2 days, no days.
That's, to me, kind of the biggest shift during COVID is the value shift. Forget about the technical details, the location details. It's the value shift. It's the fact that, and everything else follows from there. Back to my previous claim, it's the fact that people awoke to the fact that the jobs they've been doing were underpaid and unsatisfactory and were taking way too long to commute to and from.
Freedom.
And now that they've tasted some limited freedom and independence over their own timeline, over their own location, over when they can take a lunch break and take care of the kids and do remote work, they had reassessed their values and their priorities and what are the important things to them, and started taking action to kind of live more in keeping with those newly rediscovered values. So people are, for example, I am here in Toronto. The real estate has been the most explosive in North America in Toronto for the last 20 years, but probably second to Vancouver only. But, in the U.S., the real estate crashed in 2008, 2009. In Canada, that never happened to begin with. And now we've had an even bigger boom than you guys. And, of course, if you take all the construction cranes in all the major metropolitan cities in North America and you add them up together, the number is lower than what you would see just here in Toronto. But the point is many people are moving out of the city, and the real estate values have increased tremendously in the suburbs and even places that you drive 1 or 2 hours away, in farms and smaller communities and stuff, because people have rediscovered the freedom of not commuting and having their own kind of dream or piece or location and working from there, and moving away from the hustle and bustle of the city. And they started placing value on that and spending time more with their family and their kids. So the biggest change in my books has been one of change in values, and change in what is really the priorities that people rank their life within. And that's why many are not willing to do the jobs they used to be willing to do, or not for the money that they used to be willing to do them for. And they're not willing, not as many people are willing to drive an hour and a half each way every day to a job that's probably underpaid. Right? So to me, that's the biggest shift. And that's why I say that the biggest change
it's in human
not in
behavior.
technology that we're observing in humanity, I would call it, generally even. So the biggest changes that we're witnessing and that we have witnessed in the last 20 years, it's not like social media or, Google and what have you. It's a change in humanity. So when you're talking about a change from, in real life to the metaverse and virtual reality and stuff like that, I say, or augmented reality, which is, the hybrid reality between real reality and sort of interposed layer of virtual reality on top of the real reality, I would say that's nice and interesting, but the deeper change and shift is the change and shift in humanity. Because what happens is first we change the tools, and then the tools change us. And then our values change. And then that process keeps happening. So to me, as a philosopher interested in human beings, the most interesting changes are not the technical ones, but are the human changes, human shifts, and those are best reflected in values.
The Zoom, okay.
Of course, and the technology gives the opportunity for that, but the technology was invented by us. So we were the drivers. We are the change agents. It's not the technology. And just like we invented one kind of technology over another, therefore we have the agency, we can use the same technology for multiple applications which are mutually incompatible or exclusive, and thereby determine the future outcome of our civilization. So even the same technology, I grew up in the Eastern Bloc, behind the Iron Curtain. I was 14 years old when the communist world collapsed in 1989. Actually, I was 13 years old. Anyway, we had the same trains and planes and crappy cars and black and white TVs, not of the same quality as you guys, but roughly the same technologies that the West had, but we used them to build the dictatorship of the proletariat, as we were told. Whereas in the West, you had what was called, a parliamentary or representative democracy. And so the same technology, but different outcomes, because the major choices are the political, they're not the technical ones. The major choices that I claim make a difference in the human civilization are never technical, they're all political. Just like you can have nuclear physics, and you can use it to build nuclear reactors to create energy, or you can use it to create nuclear bombs.
That's really optimistic. I mean, you make a beautiful case, and I would want to believe that, we're going to be in charge forever, and, our goodness.
Oh, I didn't say forever, but at least for now, we are, at least until the AIs are as smart or smarter than us. I think we are.
Right now? No, I can't.
Would you disagree with that?
I wouldn't disagree with that now.
Because it's interesting.
But I will, of course, disagree with that later. I think one thing you're not thinking about, maybe you are thinking about it, but if you had a technologically uploaded leader who was, that could go to evil or good, right? But who's more capable and smarter and can think better and can rule people better and can, get people around him or her, probably him maybe, I don't know. You know, right now, I think you're right. We're in a midpoint or a lower point to technology taking over. But I don't think we're headed that way towards humanism. I think we're headed toward a technologically driven or mixed with humanism future.
Well, we are already a civilization of technology, and we cannot survive without it. So if you kill the technology, there will be massive death and destruction. Billions of people would not be able to survive. We're going to shrink probably by a factor of 10, if not 20, in terms of how many people we can support on our planet, simply because it's the technology that has allowed us to procreate and have like 7-8 billion people. And otherwise, people are coming up with estimates of maybe 200 or 300 million at the most. So we are already a technological civilization, but I'm still, and maybe that's where you're assessing me or putting me in the optimist camp, is because I still think we can make a difference, and we can steer, at least, if not reshape and change, but at the very least steer, and maybe even crazy enough to shape the future in a better direction than it seems to be shaping right now. Because if you look at the science, perhaps one could make an argument that global warming is inevitable. Others have made an argument that AI is inevitable. Others have made an argument that mind uploads are inevitable. I personally don't see any of those as fully inevitable, and especially inevitable in their application, in their unique occurrence. So you can have, as I said, the same technology, but how it's applied.
Yeah, but we're only this group here. You know, other people have different motives. So I have one thing I want to say about companies, let's say. Okay, so the Great Escape. But how are these companies going to maintain the hero worship of the companies we work? I work for Unilever. I'm so proud of it. I work for P&G. I work for Campbell's Soup. You know, when the population disperses, it's hard to hold the culture, I think. So I think we're going to see, you know, big changes. And I think it was even Fortune that said maybe 50% of the companies that we call Fortune 500 will be gone, you know, because others will take over, or they'll just, you know, disintegrate into the ether because of their, to your point, ethics, or they can't brainwash fast enough, or make people believe that to work for this great company is just so incredible. So, you know, I think the other thing I want to ask you is, I have this fantasy that, you know, we're not allowed to reproduce, really build a human, what you're calling a human, you know, like a Frankenstein, but a human being.
Are you talking about cloning?
Building.
Can you please elaborate? Because I don't think I get the meaning or the sense you're trying to convey to me.
Is there a place on the planet where some government or some group are building humans and human beings and programming them to whatever their philosophy or goals are?
Well, it depends on what you mean by programming. I mean, propaganda is pretty good at programming. Just look at Russia. Now, it's just like one of endless examples. And, you know, we in the West are no immune to propaganda, but look at Russia.
Do they really? Or is that,
they're denazifying
do they think that?
Ukraine right now, right? Well, a shockingly large number of people in Russia do that. And the examples are particularly shocking with, let's say, there were a number of examples. The BBC was interviewing people in the Ukraine, and there's this girl saying, my mom in Moscow doesn't believe me that I'm being bombed because she tells me that the Russian soldiers are coming here to liberate me. So that's a conversation between a daughter and a mother. Another guy was saying, my father, who is in a monastery in Moscow, so he's an Orthodox priest, tells me that I'm being liberated and doesn't believe me when I tell him that the Russians have destroyed our village and have killed half the people, the civilian people.
So I'm talking
So
about
clearly the
programming.
propaganda works.
I mean, yeah,
right?
technological programming. Yeah,
Well,
but I'm talking about
isn't that the kind of
talking about
programming?
building a human race.
Sure, I get it. I know what you're talking about in terms of programming. When you say like programming a computer, right? You're talking about building a whole human from the ground up and
Yeah.
programming it like a universal soldier kind of idea or what have you. But that I just wanted to show that programming has a diversity of meanings, and we've always done that in a way. Education is programming, propaganda is programming, books are a way of programming. So we program and reprogram if this is the hardware, the software inside is being programmed and reprogrammed from the moment we're born until the moment we die. But in your sense, specifically in the technical sense, so the answer is yes, I'm sure people are trying to do that, but we're nowhere near close to it, I think, because I've interviewed, for example, Miguel Nicolelis from Duke University, and he was one of the first people who put a brain implant at the Rio Olympics for this quadriplegic to use an exoskeleton to kick a ball to start the World Cup, for example. And he connected monkey's brain to all kinds of devices, or to rat brains to communicate remotely with each other over the internet. All those incredible experiments. He's an absolute skeptic about this whole idea. He says we don't know anything remotely close to what we need to know to be able to do that. He told me straight up, the singularity is not near, it's entirely bullshit, and mind uploading is not even remotely close because we haven't gotten the foggiest idea how to do it. And brain simulations, we can't even, according to him, those are all his words. We cannot even have the most remote simulation of a human brain. So far, the best we've done, if we accept it, is like, let's say, cat brain that is being simulated for a few seconds, and to do that we've used like supercomputers that run for months and months at a time. And in his definition, even that's a misrepresentation, because that cat brain was not really a representative simulation of a proper cat brain in his estimate. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I can't weigh that specifically and say how truthful or not, but it's curious to me to observe that some of the people at the cutting edge of that technology are the biggest skeptics about those claims.
It's just like, Tom Watson's computer took up a whole building, right? And they go, it can never be smaller, it can never do this, it can never do that, because they're not smart enough to crack it. Maybe we have to infuse the brain with a few more, or open it up and think better. But I don't buy the people, I notice this in companies too. The people that are in the making today cannot make tomorrow. They're missing something. So I know they're saying that they can't and they don't, and it's far away. And it makes everybody happy too. So that's that's good. But I don't think so. I think we're just not smart enough to do it, or the people that have done it don't want to expose it.
Ray Kurzweil says that the experts on the cutting edge of the field are usually too hijacked or restrained by the nitty-gritty details and are cursed by their knowledge. So they cannot see the longer view or beyond the narrow challenges that they're facing in their fields, and therefore historically have been or are allegedly a lot more short-sighted.
You didn't ask me the way we see the future, or why we have been, successful in a way, and it relates to this. We look down 25 years, and it's easy to get drunk. You can brainstorm, get drunk, have lots of, vodka and whatever it takes, and in 25 years it's going to be this way, no constraints. Then we do backcasting to the present, and then we look for the signs and signals of that
You reverse
potential
engineer
future.
from there.
Slower, faster, different, and then we can like kind of track it, and it's really helped us see, what's coming. So I say futurism doesn't come from the past, which is what he's saying. The people that live in the present and the past, they can't do it, but you have to look far future to see the signs of those people or engineering or technology that can do it.
I like that actually a lot. That's probably my favorite thing so far that you've said. Futurism doesn't come from the past. Therefore, futurism comes from the future. I like that a lot. So how do we do that? Let's say I'm a futurist who has no clue about the future, or I am just an average Joe. How do I see the future? How do
scenario. You just imagine a future. So different people imagine different futures. Some people, I think, are better at it, more imaginative. Futurism is just stories. That's why science fiction shouldn't be ignored. A lot of, like you brought up science fiction writers, they imagine the future. And then we say, it makes us, it's like, I always read the end of a book, which is terrible, but I love it because I can see how the plot is developed. I like to see how so it's like figuring out the end, or 25 years hence, and then seeing how the plot's being developed or not, or falling off or exceeding or whatever.
How do you know you're not entirely up for lunch? Like because let's say you have 10 people looking out 25 years ago, you're going to get 10 different views, even if they're professional futurists. That's my impression after having a bunch of these conversations. We never agree on anything.
I don't think so, though, because even you said that if there's singularity or whatever, it's just you think it's much further away. You didn't say it's not going to happen.
Okay, that's a fair point.
Just timeline.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, we can see the trends, or most, hopefully the bigger ones. But also what we don't see, and perhaps that's where kind of the differences come between you and me, is like our engagement and our responsibility to shape that future, perhaps, maybe, toward for the better. More useful, or in a way that's what you're saying too with applied futurism, because I would say that futurism is about pattern recognition, right? Seeing the patterns, following them logically perhaps, and either backwards or reverse engineering them from the future to the present. But there's two or three several steps on top of that layering. So, for example, it's not just seeing the patterns, it's about being able to take advantage of those patterns, to ride the waves rather than being drowned by them, right? It's about utilizing those patterns or those trends that you have identified. But then there's another step on top of that, and that's the harder step, and it's creating them, actually. Like, it's much harder to be Elon Musk or Steve Jobs and create the trends than simply observe them, or then simply take advantage of them. And then finally, I would add the ethical dimension perhaps on the top of those three other ones, and say, okay, so if you are able to create the trends of the future or of history, the question then is, are you creating them or shaping them towards a good end or a bad end, towards the better future or the worse future? Because you can say, well, many people put an impact on history and on the future, but it wasn't for the better, it was much for the worse. Whether, even Putin now, Putin surely put an impact on the world that he would be remembered for forever with that war in Ukraine. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Surely it's not a good thing, I would say. Not even for his own country, I would say. Not even for Russia, not even for his own, quote, legacy. I think he would be judged for that, and I think in time he would be judged very unfavorably. Just like, even though he's super popular right now in Russia, still, And his popularity is being challenged increasingly, and the propaganda is starting to crack here and there already. But without argument, he did leave his impact on the present and the future, therefore, in so many ways. But it wasn't a good impact. It was a detrimental, destructive one. No, I'm just saying that's the difference between kind of observing the trends and naming them, then writing them, then shaping them,
that you say we don't
and then
shape
finally
them because
layering
I say we're
on top.
Observers. I think that we shape them because we're working in the largest enterprises in the world, and not only telling people what's coming, but warning them against the bad things that they could be doing, contributing to what's coming. So I think in that way we try, we do our part to say, like, people are going to catch on to you. They're going to, break the corporate veil. They're going to look under there. They're going to realize sugar's bad and fat's bad, and that you're not donating enough money, and, you're not promoting women's or diversity, or, supporting kids, or whatever. We do lay down, do that. But I'd say our main...
Yeah. And you do have a history of, like, warning Kodak about the future of film being digital, Coca-Cola about bottled water, or...
the way that these companies are constructed. We have predicted revolutions in companies, to say people are restless and unhappy, especially women and men of color, they're miserable. So we sensitize, I guess, maybe management to look at these things. However, I think our main purpose is to even, like, jump over this now and look even further as a system, like I told you, a warning system. That and we're not. I don't think we're. Maybe my ego is too small. I don't think we think of ourselves as a changing system. I think we think of ourselves more as a warning system and leave the changes to the people that are creating, like, future destruction. Example, like, we work with a big, like, company that makes a lot of plastic bottles. We were hired to say, how can we change this? How can we help this? And it's pretty complicated, but etc. And we came up with some very interesting innovation. People that were working on, like, tubes to capture it. I mean, all kinds of things. But let me say this. They don't want to do it. Why? Because it says it brings too much attention to the fact that they make so many plastic bottles.
There's a lot of considerations in politics and fear of change, and a lot of things and reasons why people fail to acknowledge or embrace or do anything about your predictions. And that's why you opened up that, in a way, you're like Cassandra. So, that's a very fair way of putting it, I think. I think it's been a couple of hours now since we started our conversation today with you. Let us bring our conversation here slowly towards the end. And first is, where can people find more about you and your work?
We have a website. I have a podcast called Jolty, which, it's not the size of yours. And by the way, you'd be very invited if you feel like jolting our audience. It's things that jolt you and make you, like, sick. Like, you go like, oh my God, like Jolty. So we have that. I have that with Adam Hamft. Also a brilliant futurist. Brilliant. He's the smartest person. Well, now I've met you, but I don't know. He's the smartest person I know, actually, Adam Hamft. So that's one way. I guess my website, and I always answer, I answer anybody that writes to me. So they write to me at faithpopcorn.com, and I answer them. So far I've been able to do that, and like that, or beam me up,
I enjoyed this conversation. I'm wondering what's the best way for us to wrap it, and I always give the last word to my guests. One thing that stands out to me, or two things, and you can totally go in any other direction that you prefer to, is that I will take away from this conversation is that the future is not made in the past, but also about the difference in kind of futurism, because it kind of brings awareness, and maybe it's arrogance, maybe it's ego, because you're stating kind of humbly and more modestly than me that you're more about a trend spotter and an oracle of the sense of Cassandra, and kind of that's the kind of futurism that you practice. Whereas, I come more from the philosophical school where, Karl Marx said that philosophers have always tried to interpret the world. The point, however, is to change it. Well, to paraphrase Marx, I would say futurists have always tried to predict the future. The point, however, is to create it in the best way possible. So that's kind of, and maybe it's my arrogance or lack of modesty, which is why I'm writing the book I'm writing currently right now on rewriting the future story, the human story. But that's kind of like some of the elements that came out in our conversation today with you. So how do you think is the best way to wrap this conversation? What's the message perhaps that you want to send us away with?
I was on a platform, a speech, one of those convention things that you do too, with Colin Powell. And he said to me, I said, "Oh, Colin, please run for president. I love you." I loved him. Mm-hmm. And he said, "You run for president, Ms. Popcorn. You do a better job." I go, no, I'm not going to be president. I said, "What can I do for you?" And he said, "Change one child's life." And I adopted my first daughter, Georgica, from China. So when you say you can, like if you know about the Chinese orphanages, I mean, you can go on and on how horrible. I pulled one kid out of there, and then she wanted a sister, so I pulled Clara Cecil out of there, my second child. And I would say, if you can change, you're saying change the future, I'm saying change the outcome of one person, if everybody did that. And my mission, I mean, what I would love to leave behind, and so far I'm nowhere with this, is a global list of every homeless child that we could look at. We can go to Amazon and find anything, right? Why can't we go somewhere and find every child that needs a home, their history, the problems of adopting from that country, whatever it is, help, a global, repository of every homeless child. So we can all, maybe if we all took one, there wouldn't be any. Now there are a lot in the Ukraine too. So I would say what Colin Powell said, change one person's outcome and you will have changed the future.
Change one person's outcome and you would have changed the future. I love that. That's brilliant. And it reminds me I was watching or reading an Indian story, and I forget which Indian story. Was it the Bhagavad Gita? No, maybe it was some other ancient Indian legends and myths, or what was it? But they were saying the discussion was about how you change the world and how it was impossible to change people, and how the same mistakes we're doing today we've always done since the beginning of the world, and the response to that was, if you can change one person, you can change many, and you can change the world. So that was the bottom line. So when you just said to change the future, change the life of one person, that's what it reminded me to, which I love, and I think it's brilliant. Me and my wife, we don't have kids. We've had we've been supporting World Vision for probably 20 years. So we had a child in South America, and then one in Azerbaijan in the sort of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, an orphan, and now we have another kid in Africa. But it's nothing like adopting like what you did and bringing one in your family, or two even.
Do it. It's not hard. It is not hard. honestly, you know how people go, I adopted them singly. I'm not married. No partner. Maybe it's easier in a way. You don't fight about anything. Just make all your own mistakes. But, I can't tell you. I see what you're like. And, one thing I can see into, I feel I can see in there into you. And I'm telling you, you will be a wonderful parent, and you will climb a level. Not because you saved the kid. You see, I thought, oh, I'm saving a Chinese kid. I grew up in China. No, that kid saved me. And that child will save you. And 2 will save you twice as much. Or 5.
Wow. Well, that's I think a perfect point to call our conversation to an end. And perhaps let me see if I can find a quote here that I actually got today, and it was from the Bhagavad Gita. So maybe even the previous story that I was mentioning was somewhere along that book. But you're called to adopt a child and therefore change yourself, not only their life, but change yourself and in a way change the future and change the world. Reminds me to this quote from the Bhagavad Gita. The ignorant work for their own profit. The wise work for the welfare of the world. So Faith Popcorn, I want to thank you so much for being with us today and for pushing us to work for the benefits of others, for the betterment of others, for the salvation of others, and therefore for our own salvation. Thank you very much.